Please welcome Stripe Managing Director, Australia and New Zealand, Karl Durrance.
Hello again, and thank you to Emily and JJ. So, what a day. It's been a long day, and I'm excited to be hosting our final panel to chat about the opportunities and challenges that are presented by the digital economy for Australian business. But before I invite our panelists to unpack their thoughts, I thought I'd give you a bit of a perspective from Stripe. And so let's start with this. When we think about GDP, we naturally think about very, very large numbers like 100 trillion. And as you can see, over a long period of time, GDP continues to grow up and to the right, outside of a number of significant moments in time. Now, it begs the question, where is the next 50 trillion going to come from? And at Stripe, we would posture that a significant portion of that is going to come from the digital economy, right? So right now, the digital economy represents about 15% contribution to global GDP, but what's interesting about that 15% is that it is growing over 2.5 times faster than the rest of GDP. And it's projected to reach a value of over 20 trillion by 2025. And so, as we look forward at predicting the future for the next 50 trillion, this component is going to have an outsized contribution over the next 5 to 10 years. Now, we can break digital into a whole bunch of different categories, but when it comes to where the growth opportunities are being presented, we've got these three that we're seeing right now as an area of opportunity. And so the first is automation. And so business leaders are starting to shift their focus towards optimization and efficiency by digitizing more core processes. This is both at the front end of their business, but also in the back office. Changing consumer expectations are a challenge for business as they continue to engage with their prospective and existing customer base, and the way that consumers are paying for goods and services is changing. When we look at Gen Z and the fact that they represent about 24% now of workers, the fact that there is a large proportion of the population that no longer carry wallets, the fact that cash is on significant decline over the last 10 years, it is a significant challenge, but opportunity for businesses to lean into that. And then finally, international expansion. So we did some research recently that found that 86% of businesses believe that it's never been easier to go global than today, and 76% believe it's never been easier to reach a new customer segment. So when we look at the global opportunity, the opportunity has never been broader. And so let's unpack the opportunity and the challenges for Australia with three thought leaders: Dominic Price from Atlassian, Professor Genevieve Bell from ANU, and Larry Diamond from Zip. We had a really big conversation around where to sit, and we worked out just sit under the picture. So we might introduce from the far side Dom, and so just for the benefit of everyone in the room, so Dom is the resident work futurist at Atlassian, responsible for helping the tech giants scale how they work from a distributed team perspective, but you also spend 50% of your time working with Atlassian customers on how to optimize teams. Yep. And so thank you for joining us. Genevieve, you're from ANU. You're the first female Vice Chancellor and the President of the university, also a Vice President and Senior Fellow at Intel, best known for your work on the intersection of cultural practice, technology development, and also a leading voice on AI. And so thank you for joining us. And Larry is the co-founder and US chairman of Zip, a digital financial services company offering access to point-of-sale credit, digital payment services, connecting millions of customers with global networks of thousands of merchants. So, welcome. I think we've got a very diverse panel here of perspective. It's hard to see you, Dom. It's like, yeah, we've got to work out the way of...
Is that better? There you go.
All right, so let's start with what is the opportunity? But most importantly, when we think about what are the things that Australian business can do today in order to capitalise on the digital opportunity over the next 5 to 10 years, Genevieve, do you have any starting thoughts?
Yeah, we obviously drew straws behind stage and I lost. Look, I think for starting thoughts, it's a couple of things, right? It's really tempting, because Dom and I both trade in the futures, to spend your time imagining what you should do 5 and 10 years from now. But I think the reality is we should be asking ourselves, what should businesses be doing today, tomorrow, and the next day to, in fact, be in the world, not prepare for it as though it were turning up somewhere else. And I tend to think there's usually a couple of things that are really important. And they're really simple, right? Know what it is that is your business. Know what your business model is. Be really clear if you're adding technology to it or wanting to automate it or augment it through AI, that you shouldn't just augment what you have. Some of the worst processes I'm sure any of us have ever seen is when you just take, because I'm old, you'll remember when we took forms and put them online. And we just copied the forms and stuck them online, and we didn't think, what are we trying to get done here? And there's a little bit about being really clear about knowing what your business is, knowing what your business models are, and then thinking about how technology can make that better, rather than saying, I have technology, now I should use it. So I think there's a clarity. There's always a piece about, do you have the right capacity and capability, and do you have it in the right place in your organization? Do your key decision makers know how to ask the right questions? So do you have the right people around your senior leadership table, around your board or your advisory table, to be asking, is this a good idea? And then there's a little bit about making sure you're clear about who you're building dependencies with. I tend to think when you're bringing technology in, you're often bringing new relationships in. And so being clear about who those people are, do they share your values? Are they bringing you new risks, because supply chains and all that sort of stuff. So that for me is kind of capability, talent, capacity, clear about your business, and clear about who's in the room with you.
Yeah, it is interesting on the distraction, because when we look at the digital economy, it's a technology opportunity, it's an opportunity enabled by technology, but what we've got to be careful doing is deploying technology for technology's sake and assuming it's going to get us there, versus going back to the crux of the problem. What are you trying to solve?
And we make it into a fetish, right? No one ran around saying the photocopier economy or the fax economy or the electricity economy. And so there's a bit here about trying to work out what digital is doing for us in that way, and being really clear again about what's the point of your business, and making sure that you are making that the through line, not the technology itself.
Karl, just to sort of add to that, I've often said that a fool with a tool is still a fool, you've just made them faster. And I've worked with some proper fast idiots in my time, right? And so there is this hype where we're like, oh, technology is going to fix everything, AI is going to fix everything, technology is going to fix everything, without understanding the human element. I think the specific to your question, though, there's 2 things I want to call out. One is, if we over-index on the future, we forget the past and the present. And actually, there is a shitload we can learn from the past. If we hold on to it, we become nostalgic, we fail, right? And I think we do that sometimes. We're like, oh, remember yesteryear, the good old days? You're like, they're not coming back. So we need to move on from that. But don't forget the things that we can learn from that, because there's huge lessons you can then apply. The second point is, I always enjoy this idea of like the borderless business. And the minute someone thinks that, they're like, the total addressable market for my product is $50 trillion. And you're like, it's not, right? You're never going to get that. So how do you think more realistically about what the opportunity is? And the tension there is, borderless means I'm going to compete globally. That's more competition. And sometimes your customers want localization. They want personalization. And that trade-off's really hard. Do I operate in 150 markets and build 150 versions of my products? Or I build one version, it works for everyone, and by working for everyone, it works for no one? And I think that tension is something we need to play out.
Yeah.
I'd probably just add, I think we're touching on, there's the rapid pace of technology evolving is only accelerating. So as businesses, how do you become just extremely agile and sort of codify that? And as you get bigger, it gets much harder. I've seen that with Zip. When we were small, it's much easier. How do you rapidly experiment? And I think what we saw with COVID really taught boards and management teams how to be agile. Yeah. You actually need that muscle. You need to be... A lot of the trends were actually already there. I think they just weren't being fed up to management and boards. They weren't listening, all right? A good example.
But Larry, do you think that stayed? Because I feel like the forcing function of COVID was this like forced experiment, and then I feel like some of them have retreated and they've gone back to 2017. Not rather than pushing forward to 2027, they've retreated to the good old days again.
I think that's probably true, because it's not a... there was a forcing function, but that's why it's the culture. It's the engineering of culture.
Yeah.
And, you know, culture eats strategy for breakfast, as they say, every day of the week. So how do you build in an ability to be agile, rapidly experiment, experiment incredibly quickly in market, live, so that you can continually be across the trends. And so I think it's how do businesses get ready for that so you can be adaptive to any of these, you know, changing trends.
I love that, because you're actually not suggesting, hey, you need to lean into this mega trend right now. What you're saying is you need to lean into an operating model and a mindset of experimentation and getting ready to adopt technology, whatever it may be, over the next 5 to 10 years. Lean in and use that as an accelerator and a tailwind, versus over-fixating on, hey, there's this trend right now and I better get on top of that. So, because no one can predict the future. Right?
That's what you've got to be listening to the customers. And that voice of the customer needs to sort of permeate all the way through the organization. And so having real-time listening devices, real-time experimentation, and I think that's going to get easier, right? And some of the technology will enable that.
The reason I feel confident saying no one can predict the future is I have Larry in between two work futurists on the other side of the
we
panel
don't
there.
predict, because
so I
otherwise
feel
we
safe.
get fired. We don't predict, we just postulate.
I was going to say we just know.
Yeah, we just know.
No, we just know. But I mean, I wouldn't want to lose the point there, right, which is that the notion that the technology won't actually solve whatever the thing is that you're trying to work through, right? So there's a bit about imagining that technology will fix the problems inside your business or magically make your market work. I mean, there is the whole piece about knowing, again, who your customers are, what your culture is, and being really clear about that, because technology will only amplify the things that are there. It won't actually magically fix any of them.
Yeah.
Good point.
So in the opening, I talked about the changing consumer behaviours. There are some generational shifts in the way people want to pay for goods and services. You're obviously at the leading forefront of that. And so, you know, where are you seeing the opportunities? How are the ways people are wanting to pay changing, and how is that impacting business?
All right, so we'll switch from culture to payments. It is a payments conference, right? But first of all, I do want to thank, you know, Stripe. We've really built our business off the back of Stripe, and America, where we've been for 5 years, we've been over here for 10 years, and Stripe's really enabled that borderless expansion. So, you know, big thank you to Stripe, and there's a lot more to do. But I think what we've seen really, you know, particularly in the last few years, is just the acceleration of buy now, pay later. And what's happening is it's really skewing, as we know, to sort of the Gen Z and millennial segment who really have an aversion to credit cards. And it's been interesting to look at the data between Australia and also the US, and you've probably seen the data over at CBA. But we've seen actually interest-bearing debt in Australia collapse 45% over the last 10 years. Wow. So it seems that Australia's a little bit ahead. We've got 6 million Australians who have used buy now, pay later, who preference buy now, pay later over credit cards. And in America, it's a little bit of a different story, actually. We've seen huge growth in credit card debts, actually up 50% since the nadir of COVID. And so I think what's happening is that 60 to 70% of the millennial segments are trusting buy now, pay later as alternative payments. The trend, though, is nothing unique. I actually think buy now, pay later is just another form of consumer finance. We've seen markets like Brazil, Turkey, and Israel where installments are the primary method. And for retailers, I mean, if you look at Australia, 50% of some checkouts are now going through buy now, pay later. So the trend is absolutely there. But again, my comment to retailers is listen to customers, understand how they want to pay, when they want to pay. If 1 million customers come through the door and want to pay with their left hand, you need to be able to meet that need and offer left-hand payments, right? And Stripe can probably enable that.
Yeah, well, it might not be on the list, but we can add it. I mean, if you've got a customer that wants to pay, get out of the way, right? Like, help them pay the way they want to pay, and don't make that decision for them. I think that when we look at checkout abandonment, and so, you know, for the benefit of the audience, we know that statistically, in an e-commerce world, 70% of all carts go abandoned, which means that only 30% of the carts that are filled actually turn into a transaction. We know that one of the biggest drivers for abandonment is that the most trusted or favourite payment method is not available, right? And so from a demographic perspective, that's becoming more and more in these next generation payment methods.
Yeah. And I think, for us as well, no longer are customers going to banks per se and signing up. This sort of decentralized financial services, embedded financial services, meet the customer where she is. And so it's been interesting to see businesses really invest in the payments technology layer to deliver across the omni-channel, across the experience. And so I think those are some of the big trends: unifying the payments, taking your preferred payment wherever you go. But it is quite remarkable that the little widget on the product detail page disrupted online e-com, disrupted omni-channel, and now financial services, right? And banks have recognized that it is sort of the credit card of tomorrow for the customer of tomorrow. And ultimately, you need to, even though that's sort of how it begins, here in Australia, we're trying to become the next generation of financial services, but that's about listening to the customer, and then what else can we offer them? So it's really just a beginning of this financial partnership.
It'd be fascinating to look at the human behavior around that, right? So pretend circle of trust, pretend there's no one here. So I abandon my car all the time. There's no one here. I abandon my car all the time because I've learned the behavior that if I abandon, I get a discount code.
So that actually is a standard strategy for covering an abandoned car.
I've got twins and they're really expensive, right? So, but I do that as a tactic. I pick what I want through multiple vendors, and then I wait for the email, and whichever one comes through, I'm like, I'll buy from you, because I know the end product is the same. So it's fascinating how whenever we think about a technology, we're making it easy for the customer, but there's also these weird behaviors, these unintended consequences in the background that I think we always need to look for, whatever like in this example is payments. In every example we've looked at in the past, you're like, that was the intention, here's the unintended, or maybe the consequence we could have known if we'd been a little bit more aware.
Well, and the whole other piece of it, right? We classify it as abandoned because we're thinking that the transaction is the end point. We also know that thinking about and imagining your relationship to a thing is partly fantastical, right? It's another form of recreation, it's another form of fantasizing. Yeah. And so the notion that you might stick it in a cart and never look at it again is about, because in that moment in time you thought, maybe I will wear those red leather pants, Dom.
I've still got them.
Indeed. And then you wise up and think, maybe I won't. And it was certainly, a million years ago, we saw a lot of stuff as companies were trying to work out how to go from you've abandoned it to maybe we want to reconnect. And before we'd worked out the DOM strategy, there was a period of time where abandoned carts would follow you across the internet. And so the thing in the cart would be on the next web page you clicked on. And we did a lot of work with consumers who were like, this is so creepy. Why are the shoes following me? And it was just really like, oh my God, why are they still here? I think it was a sort of a period of time, and I'm always really struck with it when we think about evolving payment methods. Though what's also happening here is we are going through an evolution in how we think about what is shopping, right? It once was quite pragmatic, acquire good because necessary. There's now a whole other layer of imagining myself in that experience, or this is in fact an experiential activity, not really an acquisition of goods activity. And how the payment systems sort of sit behind all of that's been an interesting transformation too, right?
Yeah.
No, I think it's, with the data that's being generated, with all your creepy browsing activity.
Not creepy, it's just shoes.
It's just shoes.
It's just shoes.
Manolos. But like a world of personalized shopping, right? A world where you go and see things that fit you, that match your styles, maybe dynamic pricing. All of this will soon be, you'll have the shop for Genevieve. It's just around the corner.
Yeah, but look, we've been being sold that fantasy since the first time we talked about that's Cher in Clueless, that's every movie I can think of where the image is going to be, it's just the stuff I want. And the reality is, in lots of places, when you are acquiring things, it's not always about what you want, it's about a zone of experimentation, right? So in fact, it being totally personalized is in some ways counterintuitive to the activity that people are enacting. They actually don't want to be the thing that the algorithm already knows me to be, but something else. And so I often wonder about what happens on the end level of those kind of recommendation engines where it's actually, one thing we know about humans, right? I want the same thing, the same thing, the same thing. Oh my God, I'm totally bored. I want something entirely different. And how you go from a recommendation that's about familiarity to something that's slightly discomforting is in some ways the sequence about how we manufacture taste in everything else, like movies, music, all that stuff. Sorry.
So it's more of a hybrid world.
Yes.
A hybrid. That's interesting.
So we're out of control, you should stop
No,
us
I
now.
love it. I'm going to go back to something that, Dom, that you went down earlier around the concept of going global. I think you said something like you might be focused on 150 markets, but then actually you may not be focused on any. And so, at Stripe, we know as part of our customer base here in Australia, about 30% of them are doing some form of cross-border commerce. Because we know that the domestic opportunity in Australia, and even more so in New Zealand, is just comparatively smaller from a digital trade perspective compared to, say, North America, right? And so a lot of those merchants are forced to look abroad in order to get a larger market opportunity. But what's your perspective around doing that from Australia, innovating for Australia to capture the world?
As someone who's lived here for 21 years and plans to stay, I love it as an intent, and I think it's dangerous, right? I love the intent when you go, how might we, what could we do, where could we reach? If you look at the Atlassian business model, our entire business model has been selling digital products either via CD-ROM, right, or download and server or in the cloud for 20 odd years. So from day one, with a staff of 2, our co-founders, we could reach 160 countries in the world, right? And that's paid huge dividends. And so when you see it as an opportunity, I think it's great. I think the minute we think too domestically, like how do we from here reach that, we actually miss the opportunity. So if I think about one of our biggest victories as a company in the last probably 3 or 4 years, was our approach to hiring anyone, anywhere. Right? So actually our talent acquisition pipeline changed by going, we don't have to hire in Sydney, San Francisco, Tokyo, right, and New York, the most expensive places in the world. We can hire anyone from anywhere and we can work in a distributed fashion. So our access to a talent pool changed. If we'd have gone, how do we hire more people in Australia, we would have missed out on the size of the prize. So I think, to Genevieve's point before, it's finding the things we do uniquely well here and capitalizing on that, but not at the detriment of a global scale. So my best example here is the government. Every time I talk to a politician, which I try and limit the amount of times I do it, they tell me, they're like, we need legislation for Australia on X, right? And it's on AI, right? And you're like, how? How do you legislate a thing that exists globally? Because if you legislate it differently to every other country I operate in, you've added a tax to how I work. And so we've always got this friction of what do we do locally versus what do we do globally? And I think ultimately it comes down to how can you support that model? Right? If you're going to go global, can you support that model, and how? If you're going to hire globally, how are you going to support that model? Because whatever you choose to do, you need to be able to back it up. And that's the thing people miss out on. They're like, it's great, I can operate in 190 countries. You now need to support your product in 190 countries. What does that mean?
Yeah.
So it's the follow-through that people miss. They see the first prize, they see the dollars, they see the transaction, not the how do I sustain that business. And I think that's the thing we need to anchor on.
Yeah. Just on the, it's a little bit off topic, but it was aligned to what you just said around the talent pools. I'm just interested, when you traditionally go to a job site and you advertise, there is a job location, right? But I love the talk track around we're expanding access to talent if we diversify out of the concentrated centres and maybe go into, hey, regional Australia or something like that, right? Like, how do you advertise there? Do you pick a regional centre, or do you say just it's fully flexible across Australia? How does that work out of interest?
Yeah, combination of two. So we try and work on a halo, and the halo is not geography, it's time zone. So wherever you work, we want some level of overlap. Like, we work on a 4-hour overlap for our teams.
Right.
If you don't have some overlap, you're working purely asynchronously, you lose connection. That's bad, right? You don't all physically need to be in an office, but we need to be in a similar time zone. So we look at regions, and so we advertise for jobs in Australia. If you're in Melbourne, Perth,
Right.
Sydney, I don't care where you are. You do where you live your best life where you are, and if I let you do that, you're going to turn up to work infinitely better than me forcing you into a physical concrete space in Sydney, right, or anywhere else. So very soon after the pandemic, our biggest location that didn't have an office was Melbourne. We had 430 people in Melbourne, and we've never had an office there. We opened one for the first time 2 months ago. But we had 430 people who were self-sufficient without having access to an office. So we can hire them where they are. The investment you then have to make is how you work, because you haven't got the free proximity of the three of us hanging out, being by the same water cooler, so you miss that fidelity conversation. You have to replace that on purpose, otherwise you work very transactionally.
Yeah, interesting.
I was just going to add, Dom, if I look at Zip in Australia and in the US, they've grown quite differently, right? Australia was very in the office, you get together on the whiteboard, solve problems, whereas America really grew under COVID remote. And so it's been amazing to watch how the problem solving, how folks get together, it's sort of asynchronous communication, lots of documentation. Very effective, but like a very different way of...
It's a completely different muscle.
It's a totally different muscle.
It's one of those things like, you made a statement before, Karl, about you've got to be nimble, right? You've got to be agile. The statements are so easy to make and bloody hard to do. So you're like, asynchronous communication, you're like, yeah, that makes sense. It's a really hard muscle to actually practice.
Cool. So,
just
Genevieve.
kill the conversation there.
Well,
I mean,
I was also just thinking about, so sitting in between two companies, I run a university, right? And I think about the fact that while we can talk about education being asynchronous and remote, the reality is we know you learn more in a physical classroom, not just from your instructor, but from your peers. We know you learn from your body, not just your brain. And so there's been a bit for us about, I watched the moment when our students could be back in their classrooms and back on campus, and it was extraordinary, right? The kind of the feeling of the place when it woke up again. It was like something out of a really quite sickly sweet fairy tale, right? Where suddenly the whole thing just came back, and it was remarkable. And it was something I think about. And you're right, Dom, about if you're going to not be in person, what you have to invest in terms of scalable culture, in terms of rituals, in terms of touch points, in terms of things that seem profoundly intangible and frankly feel like nice to haves or not good ROI. When you actually watch people physically back together, you realize that there's all this stuff about just being near someone that establishes trust and care. And there's some extraordinary ways that people get a little de-skilled when they're not physically co-present. That's really interesting in terms of how you learn to argue properly. How do you have productive discomfort? How do you learn to litigate an idea? Because it's really easy to shut it down when it's on a screen and you lose things in that. And I think there's a little bit about...
It's easy to get flame wars online, right, than it is in...
And not easy to teach people that it's actually hugely important to have those kind of, at Intel we used to call them constructive confrontations, right? Where you're arguing the idea till you get to a shared truth. And I think that's much... Even as the technology has gotten remarkably good, that is a little bit harder to do.
So I'm with you. We do, our Stat Show, we do intentional togetherness. We get our teams together in person. You can work wherever you want, but we get you together kind of 4 times a year, and our connection score and our engagement survey goes through the roof. In the following 3 months, it just slowly drips down. You're like, we're going to get back together. So it's never going to fall off a cliff. You build enough connective tissue, but you're doing such high fidelity stuff. That's an in-person activity. Not everything that we do every day is that high fidelity. So it's finding that mix.
I think, it's just going to be different for different roles, different businesses.
Different days.
And thinking about the difference between what is a task versus what is, so tasks inside a job, easier to think about doing asynchronously, remotely, but places where it's generative, where it needs to be sustained, where it is in some ways about a conversation that unfolds over an arc of time. Even the digital versions of those don't work as well.
I think that's why, investing in bringing people together. I got really fatigued during COVID doing strategy workshops on Zoom.
Oh, God.
There's biophysical reasons for that. So two things.
Okay.
The frame refresh rate on screens, particularly on laptop screens, refreshes more slowly than your eyes do. And so your brain is constantly trying to fit in between the pixels in the refresh rate on your screen. And it turns out when someone is this close to you, only 1 or 2 things is going to happen.
Wow.
I've learned a lot here today.
And it turns out both of those create a really high adrenal reaction in you. And so that sense of, unsurprisingly...
That makes a lot of sense.
It does. And so that sense of fatigue was that we were basically constantly trying to fill in information that our brain thought was missing, whilst having all these faces really close to us. And it was exhausting.
And not the people you want either. It's not the ones you want there that close.
I don't know the two of you.
God,
Whatever.
I never thought of it that way.
But that's why you were tired.
There you go.
Yeah.
I wish I knew that. I did buy 8 Oculi or Oculuses for the executive team.
Oh, no.
So we could sit in the Horizon workroom. But
did that help? No.
we didn't get. We had one chap who wasn't interested in it. So
Yeah.
that, lowest common denominator broke it.
And yet again, you've lost control.
No, this is exactly what's meant to be happening.
It's like,
This is the end of the day.
make them stop.
Let's bring it back onto topic, shall we? So Genevieve, it would be remiss of me to not go down the AI path if you're here on the panel.
Okay.
We're not going to talk about large language models. Well, I mentioned it, so maybe we will. But so, do you think Australian businesses are equipped to take advantage of the opportunities that AI offer?
Look, it's a big topic, and Dom and I both sit in lots of conversations where people worry about, is Australia being left out of the AI race, whatever that might be, what is that? And look, three things I think are really important in this conversation. Number one is being really clear about what we mean when we talk about AI. Are we just talking about process improvement and automation? Are we talking about some kind of generative AI system that's creating new things? Are we talking about some form of machine learning? And my suspicion, because I have certainly sat in those meetings, people turn up and go, I have some AI for you. You think, what is that? So there's a little bit about being really clear about what we're talking about. That said, Australia has some extraordinary centres of excellence around AI, both in the academic and university space. So we have invested over a nearly 15-year cycle in computer vision in Australia, so helping computational objects recognise the world around them and do things as a result of that. We have really strong capacity in machine learning. Some of the building block pieces of that puzzle were developed in Australia, and we have some extraordinary talent. We also have it sitting inside places like CSIRO, so our, the kind of national labs. We also have industries that are not usually in the list that you think about when you go, there's a big AI industry. So my colleagues, we have a Futurist colleague, we probably don't know him terribly well, but we have a Futurist colleague who sits in the very large agricultural machinery business in the United States. So Caterpillar and John Deere, right? And they want to come to Australia so badly because in Karthra in Western Australia, the mining sites there have the largest deployments in the world of semi and fully autonomous vehicles. Not cars, but mine trucks that are the size of this stage running around like entire mining sites. And our mining and mineral extraction industry has some of the largest deployments of full-scale AI anywhere on the planet. And the same with our banks. Well, while my friend here may be trying to undermine and remove banks, I understand that. It turns out our banks are still the largest AI companies in Australia. They have the largest data sets, they have the biggest workloads, they are doing the most interesting things with it, both from the kind of more traditional classic pieces. But my colleagues at CBA in the AI groups there, multiple years ago now, worked out that people were using micropayment tools, so sitting inside the mobile phone apps basically, were using micropayments as a way to harass people. So they were using it as a way of engaging in gender-based harassment. So in sending a payment to my ex, putting a piece of horribleness in the micropayment piece. And the banks worked that out, and we were able to create a series of scripts that held those payments back and started to expunge that as a vector of attack, right? And I think about that, and I think that's a whole other way of thinking about what AI can do and a whole other sector in it. So, look, I think there's a place where we imagine AI as just big American tech companies and occasionally big European tech companies and a couple of big Chinese tech companies. But the reality is there's AI in all kinds of things. And in Australia, precision ag, mining, banking, and to a lesser extent in things like the Bureau of Meteorology and the ABS are places where Australia is actually leading the world.
Fascinating.
Just to add to that, because we've had hot debates on this before, I think as we approach this topic, if we forget the utopian window dressing of AI for a minute and just be realistic, I think there's two questions we need to ask ourselves. One is why, and the other one is why not. We ask why because we talk about the tech as this, it's going to solve the world without going, why? Like, why are we trying to use it? For what? And we've debated before, like, when you see a genuine use case, you're like, finally. I saw one recently, and we've laughed about this before, like, if you write 4 bullet points, you ask the AI to expand that to a long prose, and you do, and I send it to you, and you hit the button to summarize it to 4 bullet points. Like, what's the fucking point, right? That's the wrong why, right? So I think we really need to ask, why are we doing this? What is the end goal? What's the intent? And when we do that, like, at Atlassian, we argue all the time, normally on a whiteboard, virtual or in person, like, why are we doing this? What is the use case? How does it benefit the end user? That's really important. The why not is, what might go wrong in doing this? And I don't want that to paralyze us. I want it to mean that we look at this and do it consciously. Because I think otherwise we'll go hell-bent on this is awesome, it's going to save the world, and then in a few years go, I was there when we lit that blue touch paper, and it didn't go so well. So I think, not that I want us to be pessimistic, I just think we need to be rounded and constantly ask ourselves why and why not. So we rolled out earlier this year our responsible tech guidelines of how we're thinking about rolling out AI in Atlassian. And literally thousands of customers have been going, we need that. And he's like, no, here it is, it's for free. But what were you doing before? What was your stream of consciousness of, is this the right thing to do or not? And like, well, it's tech, so we're just doing it anyway. So I think we need that why and the why not to just have the counterbalance of thinking about doing this consciously, not by accident.
And the emerging kind of category of, not risk exactly, but dependency or consequence that we haven't really talked about a lot in the AI space. We spend a lot of time talking about how to have responsible AI, how to engage in a way that is, ethically appropriate, which is of course really complicated because ethics are contingent and cultural and change over time and look different in different places, so you can't hardwire them. But the kind of emerging information we now have has to do with how much energy is required to do some of these AI solutions. So if you look at the annual reports that have come out of key companies like Microsoft and Google over the last 2 years, they've had to talk about their increase in energy budget and their increase in water budget. So for Microsoft, it's been 20 to 30% increase in their energy budget year on year, and Google similar for water, because it turns out all that AI is happening somewhere. Or as that nice little sticker that used to be on my computer, the cloud is just someone else's computer. And it turns out that computer wants a lot of electricity and all the water. And so if you are using ChatGPT to harass him, you should stop.
Yeah, summarise four
bullet point email.
Whatever flame war you two are in with ChatGPT underneath, every time you use it, you're using ChatGPT in Australia, it is running through undersea cables all the way to Ohio and coming all the way back. And that server farm in Ohio is using an extraordinary amount of energy. Best calculation any of our colleagues can get to is it's about half a litre water for 20 prompts. Wow. And, while we can think, well, that's their water. It's a terrible way of thinking about it. Yeah. It's ultimately all of our water, and as services migrate into Australia and we build more server farms here, and we are in what is a sustained, energy transition and frankly challenging energy environment, to Dom's earlier question about is that actually the right solution, feels like a more pressing one in a different kind of way, right? Yeah. Not just should you do it, but if you've done what's the consequence?
It is interesting, isn't it? Like, it's this invisible dependency that most of us aren't thinking about. Yeah. I think when you describe it, it's quite logical and makes a lot of sense. But it's not top of mind, I don't think, generally when we're thinking about the adoption of technology, the expansion of that, and then capitalising on the opportunity.
Like sausages.
Excuse me?
If you look at our sausages, honestly, it's the same with sausages. Jamie Oliver did a show years ago about sausages and how they're made, and I didn't eat them for like a year. But it's the same thing. We're very convenient. I'm joking, but it's very convenient. Like when you think, I love sausages, but when you eat them and you just eat them as a sausage, you don't mind. Or when you consume AI, you're like, this is fine. When you know how much water and electricity it uses, behind the scenes, you're like, oh, I probably wouldn't do it as much. Right, so I think we need to be a bit more curious, maybe not about sausages, but a bit more curious about how technology works.
And the flip is true too, right? So, you and I have talked about this before, but there's a little bit as consumers, as citizens, as businesses, we ask things all the time of our providers. I'm sure you ask Stripe things all the time. I bet people ask Atlassian things all the time about how to better meet your needs. And there's a little bit here where asking for the needs to be better met is also about saying, look, we care about things being ethical and responsible, absolutely, but we should care about them being sustainable too. Yeah. And our businesses will be sustainable because we're on a planet that we can still live on. Yeah. And so there's a bit there about starting to demand of all of our various kind of partners as we travel, as businesses, as organizations, as universities, that we are thinking expansively about what we're delivering. Or don't eat sausages.
Yeah.
That was a great
sausages
analogy.
Are a good analogy. Really, for me, they were. I'm Northern English. It's a great analogy.
I thought it worked.
Yeah.
Dom, so you spend 50% of your time with businesses that are Atlassian customers in order to unleash the power of teams. And I'm wondering if you can maybe share, like, what's a common misstep that you come across, right? So maybe, as a core learning.
Yeah, I'll give you three quickly. One is There's been a kind of a fetish recently of if we paint a picture of the future, it'll magically just appear without realizing the role of leadership is, and Genevieve said this before, like facing to today. What is the reality of your business today and how can you make 1 degree improvements to that? Have a painted picture for your destination, but don't over-fixate on that. Find the thing to do today. And there's a pragmatism in that I find quite rewarding because it's about doing. It's not about analysing or saying like roll your sleeves up and get on with it. And not enough businesses are doing that. The second one is an over-reliance on consultants. I'll pay someone else to do that. And I don't think consultants are bad for advice, but if you're paying them to do the task for you, they're almost never going to solve it. They will charge you $40 million as an annuity to come and tell you how to do it. And I've seen this in the world of agile transformation in the last 20 years, right? Agile transformation, culture transformation, digital transformation, where the consultant comes in with some glorious PowerPoint slides, and you're like, $40 million later, and I've still got some PowerPoint slides. And that's hard, right? And then the third one is...
You know PowerPoint's free, right?
I know, but not if you go to McKinsey. But the third one is this strange belief that everything's about tech and we're forgetting about the human element. The best businesses I work with right now are doing simple things with humans, human behavior, how they work as individuals, how they work in teams, how they work across teams. They're doing that in a very human form and using tech to amplify it. And when I see that happen, I'm like, stand back. You are thriving. You're nimble, to Larry's point. You're listening. You've got the learning velocity. You're adaptable. You're doing the simple things right, and they've not overbaked it. And I think in the current economy, there's a real moment right now of going, if we do that stuff simply, it can be really effective. So I think the way we do it at Atlassian is quite simple. We share our ways of working online. We've got this team playbook where we publish all of our ways of working online, and we get millions of people a year going, that was really helpful. None of it's rocket science, and none of it's based on technology. It's like, how do you as humans find a way of working better together, then amplify that through tech? I think that is our secret sauce in the next 15, 20 years. It's being more human and letting the technology do the technology thing well. And the reason I say more human, I don't think we've been very human in the last 15, 20 years. I think we've been trying to compete with technology, and we need to take a step back. Don't compete with it. We're uniquely human, and that's uniquely tech, and do what you do well, and let that play out.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, businesses are made up of people. And so lean into that and get the most out of the people, and don't forget about them. Yeah, that's nice. All right, so we're running a little low on time, and so I thought, let's close out with a bit of a view of the future. And so... why should we have optimism for the future here for Australian business? We start with you, Larry.
I mean, I think one of the interesting trends for me coming up is just open data and open everything. Right? Australia's really been a pioneer, a leader in the consumer data rights. I'm imagining a world where the customer is actually going to have an amazing time over the next 10 years because the intensity of competition that's going to level up here from, we're going to have this sort of private data cloud, our own sort of private sanctuary of, healthcare data, financial data, mobility data, and the ability to consent to share that with different service providers to get a better outcome, I think is just going to be unbelievable. 10 years ago, Zip started by looking at bank data as a way to offer a better financial service. So I'm really encouraged by this open everything world, and I think the customer's got a lot to look forward to. Sharing my mobility and wellness data to get cheaper insurance. So I think businesses therefore are going to have to be able to digest that data, build business logic around it, interpreting it, offering dynamic products, more tailored products. So everyone's going to have to sort of sit up a little bit, but the customer is going to get a hell of a great time.
Everyone just sat up then a little, actually.
Yeah.
Awesome. Genevieve?
Things to be optimistic about. Look, imagine, much like Dom, I get asked all the time if I'm optimistic or pessimistic about the future. And I always think about Alan Kay, early computer scientist, right, who said the only way to think about the future is to build it. And so I tend to think that the way to be optimistic or determined about the future is to have a point of view about it. And I'm lucky I was raised by people who believe that your energy should be spent making the world a better place, and that it should be better because it was more fair, more sustainable, more equitable, more just, and it shouldn't just be better for you, it should be better for everyone. And that you had an obligation, a moral obligation, in fact, to work toward that every day. And while that may not be about technology per se, I tend to think that orientation to what the future could be better than today because we deliberately decide to make it so, because we are acting toward that, not, as Dom says, kind of just waiting for it to turn up. For me, feels like a good
make
position.
it happen.
Yeah, make it happen.
Go
And
after it.
I'm lucky enough to be somewhere where I will help make the next generation of critical thinkers and critical doers. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Bring the future forward.
Exactly.
I might flip your question, Carl, because I don't know if I am optimistic, and I want to be honest with my answer. I'm not pessimistic either. I've got 2 Post-it notes on my screen right now that are my current mantras. One is less furious, more curious. It's taken a lot of practice because I react, right? And I get furious. And I'm like, actually, right now, my job is to be curious because I don't know if I am optimistic, but whether I am or not is less important. I need to be curious about what's happening, why is it happening, how does it work? So curiosity goes a long way. The second Post-it note is argue like you're right and listen like you're wrong, which is kind of similar, but it's me saying I need to have a point of view that I put forward with vigor, and then I really need to shut my mouth and open my ears because I'm not trying to convert people to my way. I'm trying to open up a conversation. And when I remind myself I'm trying to have a conversation, I'm listening with the intent to learn more, versus if I'm trying to convert someone, I'm like, Larry is wrong. It's a matter of time till he realizes. And that's untrue. He's not wrong. But if I have that mindset, I listen very differently, right? So it's argue like you're right, listen like you're wrong. So have an opinion, but absorb everyone else's opinion as well. And then instead of being furious, just be curious. And I think if we're curious and rounded, I think what will happen will be more optimistic, but I don't think optimism will get us there.
Yeah. And I mean, it's a nice tie back, I think, in a way, back to what Larry's talked about around a way of working, a mindset, right? Being open to opportunities and being curious means that you're always going out there and being open to what those opportunities are and not being too opinionated too early. Yeah. So, wonderful panel. Everyone, let's give our panelists a round of applause.